Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parent, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in the community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community, both online and in person. We have a new resource library for all fathers called the Lead Dad Library. The one-stop shop to learn about all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up today at thecompanyofdads.com/The Dad. Today, our guest is Katherine Goldstein, founder of The Double Shift, a community for people who care about care. She's also a care reporting fellow for the Better Life Lab at New America. Specifically, she wrote a report entitled A Playbook to Transform How America Cares, the care movement's winning tactics, lessons, and case studies from the pandemic era and beyond. And that's why we're here talking today. Katherine, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we jump into the report, tell the listeners who may not know about the Double Shift. I'm a huge fan, as you know, but tell the listeners what you're building with the Double Shift newsletter and the community that's come together around it.
Yes. So the Double Shift began in 2019 as a podcast telling sort of unexpected or stories people hadn't heard before, really around the experience of working moms. Although I no longer use the term working moms, I say employed moms because I think every parent works. And it has evolved now. The podcast is not in production anymore, but has evolved into a weekly newsletter and community that really focuses on the forces that shape family life in America. And I this year have been writing about a wide range of topics. I've been thinking a lot about community building. I've been surprising myself by writing about organized religion. I've been thinking a lot about what the care movement is and what it could be. So very wide-ranging stuff that isn't your typical tips and tricks aimed at parents. And we have a member community and monthly hangouts and other ways for people to connect.
I love it. And as you know, what we're doing at the Company of Dads, language is very important. We talk about lead dads, and we describe lead dads as the go-to parent, whether they work full-time, part-time, or devote all their time to their families. In that last category, I just got off the phone before our podcast with a fellow who just opted to become what he calls a stay-at-home dad. And I stopped him right there and I said, you're not a stay-at-home dad. No parent stays at home. Parents may wish they would stay at home, but you're a lead dad who devotes all of his time to his children. I'm so excited to talk about this report, but a playbook to transform how America cares. How did this project come about? Take us back in time. I know you worked on it for all the better part of a year, but how did it all start?
So it started with some conversations between me and Bridget Schulte, who's the director of the Better Life Lab, which is a really cool think tank that focuses on care and work-life justice and transforming work culture, really great topics. And together we kind of brainstormed that we wanted to explore ideas around, what our society is taking away from the pandemic now that we're nearly 4 years from the start, what we're taking away, and what lessons that a larger care movement has learned from it. Because I think that even the idea that there's a movement of people working to transform care is sort of a new idea. And we wanted to focus on concrete tactics and real world solutions, not beautiful policy ideas that we could dream up and would be amazing and tell you all about it and how it and basically would never happen. But what are the things that are happening at the local level, at the state level, and community levels, in activist circles that are transforming our care world, and how can we elevate those lessons and learn from them and replicate them throughout the country?
I wanted to drill down and talk a bit more about the tactics because I love that part of the subtitle, winning tactics from the pandemic era and beyond. I'm pretty sure, my one winning tactic from 2020 was learning how to mix up a really fantastic margarita at home. And I put in a lot of work, Katherine. It was night after night. Nobody likes to quit her. I was just at it.
I mean, you're America, definitely.
Exactly. I'm gonna guess that's not what you were going for. Maybe there is a little bit, the perfect at-home cocktail when it gets too much. What are some of the tactics that you found that that the listeners can say, okay, I could do that, or geez, I wish I had done that, or maybe I shouldn't do that? What are some of the big tactics that stood out for you as being particularly effective for caregivers trying to figure this stuff out?
Yeah, well, so I was looking really at the systemic level, and there is definitely takeaways for individual care consumers and people who give care in paid and unpaid capacities. But the tactics were kind of like, how can we think about this from a larger movement perspective? And so, there are 8 tactics, and they run the gamut of things like power building in communities and union organizing for care workers, which is not something I knew a lot about, which is, I think, a really interesting, important part of the care movement. And then things like how we use political money to influence political outcomes, and what are effective messages, what are the language that we can learn and say to sort of advance a care narrative, and what are the images we see on TV, and how is culture changing around, especially I actually have a whole section about dads. I write a lot about millennial dads as a harbinger of culture change. And so those are all just really, so both what we're seeing and then also some takeaways about how people can think about these from a company perspective, a personal perspective, and a community perspective.
One of the things that stood out, I wasn't, it's probably in the report, but I remember reading it in your newsletter, and that was the massive imbalance in lobbying dollars. If you were, the Chamber of Commerce, you've got, $100 million or whatever the number was. And if you're, the top caregiving lobbying organization, you barely had $1 million, and it dropped off from there. I mean, it's hard to overcome big money, but what were some of the strategies that you were able to reveal that these organizations were able to do to have an impact with such a comparatively limited budget?
Yeah, well, I think we haven't seen the change we need at the federal level, and Build Back Better failed, which had really comprehensive social policy that would have transformed so much of how we care for people in America. And part of that was because there's not a political machine behind care in the same way there has been even behind some other causes like the environmental movement, other lobbying groups. And so, what I found that was so encouraging really was the movement we're seeing at the state and local levels. There's all sorts of ballot initiatives and passing different policies at the state levels that I think are creating momentum for these larger policies. So, in terms of how we should win big, large scale federal change, I think we have to be investing in that now. And it can't just be like, oh, it looks like there's a good, the makeup as Congress have changed, and now we're going to get it. Like that power has to be built over time. That lobbying money has to be built over time. And I think I'm hopeful, and I think we're going to see in the 2024 election, there will be billions and billions of dollars spent on that election, and I think more of it than ever before will be going to around care related lobbying and advertising and pushing care issues.
We kind of pull the camera back a bit. When we talk about care, I want to make sure the listeners realize care is not just childcare. Childcare is one part of it. Care is elder care, caring for a spouse. And as I look at it, I think about this. I mean, every one of us, we may not all be parents, but every one of us will be a caregiver at some point. So what do you think has held back caregivers from organizing the way, I don't know, the AARP has done with retired people? People are over a certain age. What has held back the caregiving movement from having the impact that you think it should have?
Well, it's interesting because the AARP, I think, actually is aligned in many of these caregiving ideas. But in terms of how I think parents of young children have not been well organized and have not joined a larger care movement, I think has a lot to do with time pressures, social expectations around the individual needs of children rather than sort of how we can devote to larger social change and community building. And I think there's a lot of things that parents have in common, but we are also easily divided by race, class, geography around what is best for our kids and families. And so this has been a group that has been somewhat hard to organize politically, but it's not harder than a lot of other groups. It's not harder than domestic workers. It's not harder than farm workers. So the idea that it's too hard, I reject. But I do think there's more interest in politically galvanizing parents. Hopefully, from my political perspective, around positive change for all children, and not just banning books or other things that parents seem animated about certain parts of the country.
Yeah, and obviously, we're focused here on fathers, on families, on children. Not that we don't care about it, old people, but it's
Yeah.
not really not. But I know you're still in the sort of that pre-5-year-old stage, and I have just finally passed it with my youngest, who is now 6. My girls are 6, 11, and 14. But that 3-month to 5-year period is brutal and expensive, and all that we talk about all the wonderful things about kids, and we can all agree on that. But just from a logistics point of view, from a cost point of view, and it affects everyone. I mean, 83% of married heterosexual couples in America, both people work. And so if both people are working, that means they need to find somebody to help care for their kids. Why, what have you seen in that age bracket, particularly the 3-month to 5-year-old, where there's hope? Are there certain states that are doing it well? Are there certain policies that are particularly positive?
Yeah. So one of the things that has been really exciting is to learn about ballot initiatives. So not all states have ballot initiatives, but many do. And when people run well-run campaigns, especially around children's issues for children, we see really positive. Voters want to vote for this. Voters are willing to raise their own taxes, even in red states, for funding and policies that support young children. There is an amazing constitutional amendment that passed in New Mexico that has allowed, basically has written in an access to universal childcare into their constitution, and they have a unique funding mechanism through this oil reserve fund that they are funding it through. Portland, Multnomah County, which is Portland, Oregon, is part of, put basically a millionaire's tax in. They voted for a millionaire's tax for a universal pre-K program that now is collecting over $200 million a year. So there are a lot of opportunities for that kind of funding. I think those are some of the easiest ones to explain to voters, and are people are having the most success with. But there are smaller places. There's other voter ballot initiatives that support funding for birth to age 5 and other kinds of programs that aren't just specifically, pre-K, et cetera. So the thing is that these aren't really partisan issues. When you ask people, over 80% of people support childcare support. It's not really a red-blue issue. This is popular in red and blue states. It's really the politicians that are the problem. When we put it directly to voters, like, people are happy to vote for it and they're happy to pay for it.
Yeah, there was a couple months ago, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, not to be confused with any of the senators from Massachusetts. He's about as conservative as he can be, as red can be. And he compared these issues to golden retrievers. And essentially he said, it was an artful way of saying, everybody loves a golden retriever, which is of course true. Like, who doesn't love a golden retriever or a lab? And that's, and he's a deeply conservative person, but he said, look, we can agree on this.
Yeah.
When you think about, there is this consensus, as you said, 80%, yet there is something that's holding people back, because 100% of states have children in them who are under the age of 5. So there is, this is not a specific issue. Are there any states where there are subsidies going to companies, to private companies, for them to sort of step up and do something, or for them to offer some sort of benefits and then perhaps get a break on their corporate taxes for their employees? Anything you've seen there?
Yeah, so there are a couple of states. I know Michigan is one. I believe they're piloting one in my home state of North Carolina called a TRISHARE program, which is a child care program where the government pays a third, companies pay a third, and the consumer pays a third.
Hmm.
And so they're piloting kind of these some public-private partnerships. Definitely, there's experimentation around that, and I think we're in a situation with childcare where we need every experiment, we need every pilot, we need every solution. I think the consensus among experts is that for a real transformation of the childcare system, we need some big federal investment. This can't really be solved by the private sector or just at the state level, but certainly there can be some really big positive developments can be made in those areas. So yes, TriShare is definitely
Yeah.
around, and it's a good model for seeing this as a problem that affects everyone, not just parents.
I've been asking you questions that have leaned toward hopefully positive answers, but through all your research and writing this, what were some of the really dispiriting things that you found?
I mean, one of the things that I liked about this report was that I got to really focus on a lot of solutions and hopeful things in general, because that isn't how our world feels most of the time. And so saying, hey, this is why this county that voted 57% for Trump just passed a children's initiative. Like, this is cool, this is exciting that there are places where people really care about care. I think that the thing that is dispiriting is dispiriting for me about this is probably the money in politics element, that this movement is so important and impacts so many people, but part of it is that it has not been politically resourced to make positive change. And then also, I think another part of it, which I think is really important, is that the reason that we don't have these policies, the reason that Build Back Better failed, which would have transformed and our care economy, is basically because large and powerful companies don't want to pay more in corporate taxes, and they are very powerful. And I think we need to name that is the reason. Like, we can't
Yeah.
have nice things.
Yeah.
And it's not about necessarily, and they have a huge political influence. And so it's not that people disagree about it. And, I feel like we need more things in America where people agree on and we can feel good about making people's lives better, not just preventing catastrophe. And I feel like care is just such a winning issue in that way. And it's frustrating to see. I mean, it's just a classic story of, it's basically like villainous corporate behavior. So, I'm all for calling that out in 2024 and beyond.
You talked about, you can't come on the Company Dads podcast and us not talk about dads. You talked about the hopefulness among millennial fathers.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about why you're hopeful that millennial fathers might be better than, I don't know, baby boomer dads.
Well, I think millennial dads are some of the most important harbingers of culture change around caregiving and valuing care that I see. And so I wrote really extensively, maybe we can put a link to a newsletter I wrote about this as well in the show notes or something, but basically millennial dads are the most involved. And of course there are, we can add in a few people like, Paul, I know you're Gen X, we'll add you in as an honorary. So my husband is Gen X also. But basically, millennial dads, again, speaking in broad terms, are the most involved dads in the history of modern fatherhood in terms of their involvement, the way the time they put into caregiving, the nuances that they are committed to, their ongoing commitment to equal partnership, which I think, is an imperfect thing. I don't think that you can say you have an equal partnership and stay that way forever. It's an ongoing process. And I think that we need to celebrate that. It's not that everyone, should get a cookie every time they change a diaper, but from a cultural...
Well, you'd be quite fat and probably have type 2 diabetes at the end of that because you change a lot of diapers in the course of being a dad.
But in terms of the systemic things, like, I think we need to really praise men for taking their fully amounted paternity leave. And it's really important. I think men are unexpected voices in the caregiving conversation, and people listen to unexpected voices in different ways. Even for example, when Mark Zuckerberg took his first paternity leave, this was international news that a CEO of his level, I think he took 8 weeks, maybe. This was like a gigantic deal. And a lot of other men, I think, felt like that helped enable them to take paternity leave in the future. And then when his third kid came around, nobody was caring how much paternity leave he took.
That's a great point about Zuckerberg. But I also think, more broadly, sort of any leader, it doesn't have to be the CEO, but it could be, somebody, a people manager, what formerly known as middle managers. When they model it, it makes a huge difference. But when they don't, it has a huge, detrimental impact. And the ones who may not be modeling it are Gen X or in a leadership position, or baby boomers. What do you say? Was there anything from your research that showed sort of productive, optimistic ways to get those, slightly older, leaders to sort of not, you hear these stories all the time about, oh, when I had my kids, they were young and I missed everything. And people say it in a boastful way, not in a remorseful way. Did you see anything that showed, sort of movement on that front where, there could be more productive modeling for younger employees to take that full leave?
Well, one piece of research I love is that paternity leave is contagious.
Yeah,
So
that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
if you know someone, a brother, a friend, a coworker who's taken it, men are much more likely to take it. So there's really a positive downstream effect when men are thinking about paternity leave. It's not just about your family, it's also about your community. I also think that, studies show men who take paternity leave are more likely to have a closer relationship with their child at age 6. Their wife is more likely to, or if they have a female partner, is more likely to be employed and have a stronger career. It's likely to help their relationship in equal parenting. There's so many benefits beyond just, thinking of it as a negative from work. And I honestly, I think that a new generation of dads, like, they just aren't going to stand for the idea that they're going to miss all these important moments. I think that we're normalizing that that's not normal, and that there's, that job isn't going to be there for you on your deathbed. I think that there's a lot more questioning about what we actually get from work, and trying to focus on things that really bring joy and meaning to our lives.
In a newsletter you wrote about this, it had a very provocative title, which I won't remember exactly, but it was something along the lines like, should we continue to praise fathers for, or should we continue to praise men for being fathers? And of course, the knee-jerk reaction would be, no, why? They're parents as well. But you came to the conclusion that, yes, we should praise them. And I get you joke, you don't get a cookie every time you change a diaper. That would be unhealthy. But there is that notion of praise, and I can see it coming from moms, but from other dads. Unpack that. Why is it important that, men are praised in some reasonable form for acts that, women and mothers have historically done out of expectation?
I mean, we all like praise. We all like praise.
You are great, Katherine. There you go.
We all like praise, and parenting is hard. And instead of, one of the conclusions I came from this newsletter was not just we should praise dads for doing the hard work of parenting, but we should praise everyone because it is hard. And I think that if we want to, for example, normalize paternity leave, it's amazing to me. I think most of the people in my life know, I do tons of work on moms and care and gender equity. And, people are still really surprised that my husband can handle all 3 of our children when I go out of town, and it is hard. I'm not like, I'm having a great time when I go out of town. I'm not saying it's not hard. So he deserves praise because that is hard. And not just because he's a dad doing it. And I think if we see behavior we like, we should celebrate it. I mean, I think the flip side of that is like, you see the dad taking the baby out of the restaurant and 4 grandmas come up to him and was like, you're an amazing.
You didn't drop him. How did you manage not to drop your child?
Held this baby for 10 minutes, dad of the year. I mean, that's overboard, but it does suck when you miss your dinner is cold and you're, comforting a crying baby, and that's okay to acknowledge that. I do think some of the praise, especially from older generations, had to do with how terrible the fathers were in previous generations. So there's the trade-off.
Perfect spot to end. Katherine Goldstein, founder of The Double Shift and the author of the new report, A Playbook to Transform How America Cares. Thanks so much for coming on the Company of Dads podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, and to end on a praise note, you really are great.
Thank you, Paul. You too.
Thank you for listening to the Company of Dads podcast. I also want to thank the people who make this podcast and everything else that we do at the Company of Dads possible. Helder Mira, who is our audio producer, Lindsay Decker, who handles all of our social media, Terry Brennan, who's helping us with the newsletter and audience acquisition, Emily Servin, who is our web maestro, and of course, Evan Roosevelt, who is working side by side with me in many of the things that we do here at the Company of Dads. It's a great team, and we're just trying to bring you the best in fatherhood. Remember, the one-stop shop for everything is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Thank you again for listening.